Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's breakfast briefing from the Connected Places Catapult. It's great to have you. We've got a great session lined up, some great speakers. We've got quite a few people registered to attend, and I can see lots of you already arriving. We'll just take a few moments to let everyone navigate their way in and get themselves comfortable. Good to have you here this morning. Hope you've had a good start to the day. You've had your coffee and your first 3 to 5 Zoom calls. Don't know about you. It's wall-to-wall video conferencing these days. We've got a good topic this morning. We're going to be hearing from some place leaders, hearing from some innovators, how we can respond to this post-pandemic opportunity around mobility and active travel. We at the Connected Places Catapult, we've been very, very interested in this question around how the pandemic and the experience of lockdown might change the way we live, work and play, the way we move about, where we live, where we move. And so this is part of a series we've been doing on post-pandemic places and opportunities for innovators in this new normal. And so if you're interested in that topic, in that question, what opportunities there may be for your businesses or what other places are doing, do be sure to have a look for our innovation brief on post-pandemic places. That's available on the website, and we can share links to it afterwards. And there's a whole chapter on mobility and active travel, which if you're here, I'm sure you will find interesting. And perhaps you're joining us because you joined last week's Third Thursday on that topic, in which I flagged this seminar, so in which case, hello again. Excellent. Well, I think we've probably reached a good number to start. Others may arrive as we go on, but I'll make a start. So as I say, once again, very warm welcome to the breakfast briefing from Connected Places Catapult. I'm Sam Markey. I'm Director of Strategic Analysis at the Catapult. And I'm thrilled to be hosting this morning's webinar on how we avoid Carmageddon post-Covid-19. It's a really interesting topic. We've been very interested in active travel and alternative, innovative ways of moving about in and between the places we live, work and play. And I think COVID has really accelerated many of those trends and the opportunities for innovation. So it's great this morning to have a panel of speakers who represent places and decision makers, people who are rising to the innovation challenge, trying to create products and services that enable us to move around differently and not just rely on petrol cars. And so they'll each be sharing a bit, and there'll be plenty of time for questions. So please do use the Q&A feature to send us some questions as we go through, and we'll come to those at the end. As I say, this is part of our work on sort of post-pandemic places. We're really pleased to be partnering with Iomob in putting this together. And so I'm going to hand over to Adrian from Iomob, who's going to sort of say a few words of context around the challenge and the opportunity of active travel, particularly in this new normal. Over to you, Adrian.
Thank you, Sam. So this event came about from some work we were doing looking at journey planning in the light of these new active travel corridors. And what we found is that actually it's quite complex. If you really want to take active travel journeys, and often these will be intermodal, so taking a bike or public transportation or a car to a car park and then an onward journey, it's quite difficult to journey plan and understand what different routes and modes are available. Typical journey planning gives you a route per mode, so either public transportation or car or cycling, but few of them really provide that intermodal experience. So what then happens is there is a kind of barrier. There's friction to be able to access these new active travel corridors. If you combine that also with the supply side, so I think it was Leicester that had a bike scheme or an active travel scheme where nearly 50% of the respondents would like to have participated but didn't actually own a bike. And there are quite a few people that just don't want to cycle or don't have place for a bike or don't have shower facilities at their destinations. And this new advent of electric bikes and e-scooters, we think is going to help address that. So in the context of active travel, what we're thinking about is that the kind of build it, they will come. Well, that's not enough. What we really need to think about is the digital space. So how do we enable active travel digitally, make it really easy for people to access? But then also, how do we ensure that and support the supply of various different modes that people can access? So either that's planning a travel perhaps with one's own bike, but then perhaps planning travel using different types of shared mobility. And I hope this discussion will kind of tease out some of those challenges, but also opportunities. I mean, there is some kind of discussion and concern about a plethora of shared mobility cluttering up our streets. But as long as we kind of manage that in a fair and equitable way, the advantages of getting people out of their cars using less polluting modes of transportation has got to be a goal worth seeking. And we really have a kind of a short period of time to make this happen. Already we're hearing about active travel corridors being rescinded because of complaints, and some fairly made in terms of giving back access to the car. So we've probably got quite a short period of time to actually fill those active travel corridors with new mobility. So I'll hand back to you now, Sam.
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, I think you're right. This question of a window of opportunity is really key, and as you say, a moment for innovative modes to prove their worth, to demonstrate that they can meet demand. They can be useful, they can be delightful, and they can help us get around and where we need to be before the tide of petrol vehicles and larger vehicles sweep back into those spaces which have been won during lockdown. Hopefully we'll see lots of these active travel corridors retained. So I'm really pleased to have Sohail here from Peterborough, and so I'm really interested just to have a few words perhaps from you initially, Sohail, on what the experience in Peter's been. What sort of changes have you seen over the last few months of lockdown? How has the pandemic impacted on mobility and travel behaviours in your area?
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, hi guys. So I work in the transport planning team, more specifically on sustainable transport. So we operate under the brand name of Travel Choice, and we've been working for many years to reduce single occupancy car journeys by promoting sustainable means of transport, walking, cycling, public transport, etc. So there's a number of ways in which we work. So we work with schools, businesses, and the public as our main means to promote. I suppose post-COVID or during the COVID period, we've seen our roads a lot quieter than they have been, as I'm sure is the case up and down the country. So we've introduced pop-up cycle lanes. I think we've seen a huge increase in the number of people cycling. I just tried to get my bike serviced a couple of weeks ago. The waiting list was about 2 or 3 weeks. So it's good to see more people out on their bikes. I think we're in a once-in-a-lifetime chance here to really avoid Carmageddon and make a long-lasting change. So I think a little bit later on we'll be going into some more detail about some of the stuff that we're doing in Peterborough. Just a brief intro. Back to you, Sam.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, so it would be interesting actually, you touched on some of the temporary schemes you've put in. I wonder if you want to perhaps build a bit on any of the schemes that are either recent or longer plans that you've put in place to encourage more physical active travel.
Yes, so I mean, as I mentioned, we've introduced a pop-up cycling, a couple of pop-up cycle lanes. We did look to pedestrianize one of the main sort of shopping streets within the city centre. We had a number of objections from the businesses, quite rightly so. I understand their concerns, sort of reopening after the lockdown. A lot of people's livelihoods depending on it. Although, you know, a lot of case studies from elsewhere show that when you pedestrianize the street, it actually increases footfall and is beneficial to the business as opposed to the opposite being the case. So, you know, there's been a number of schemes which have had to put on hold because of concerns raised by, you know, the local businesses within that area. So we've also installed a number of sort of cycle repair stations at sort of key, points within the city. So we've got one in the city centre, at the hospital, at the main sort of the park, Need Park, and a number of others. We also support businesses to promote sustainable travel through our business grant scheme. So we'll match fund things like showers, cycle parking, electric vehicle infrastructure as well. Yeah, so there's lots going on. There's always, as I said, we've been doing this for a number of years, so it's not something which is new to us. We do a lot of public engagement, a lot of engagement with businesses, travel planning, etc. So.
Fantastic. I have to say, I regularly cite Peterborough as a pioneering example of this kind of connected places approach. So, commend you guys on all you're doing in this space and more widely. Do e-scooters and other sort of non-bike form of transport feature in your local landscape, and how do you accommodate the integration of those?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the micromobility sector is very fast growing. I think it's going to be the way forward as a new means to get people out of their vehicles. It's very innovative. So we're exploring options along e-scooter trials, e-bike trials. We have a Brompton Hire scheme. We're also going to be looking at some of the more traditional bike sharing schemes. But I mean, they have their own challenges. They have their benefits, but there definitely are concerns from people, especially around things like accessibility, misuse of the equipment. There's been cases, for example, in Manchester, where people are dumping them in rivers, bikes in rivers, etc. But it is, as I said, it's an emerging sort of industry. It's changing constantly. There's new ways of regulating. There's new ways of ensuring that these aren't being misused. So you can use things like geofencing, things like that, and really sort of controlling how people use them, whilst also giving people the benefits of really making the most out of those opportunities.
Fantastic. That's excellent. Really, thank you so much for the sort of local perspective, the place leader perspective. Well, I'm sure we'll circle back to you in a little while. But I'm going to come to Boyd next. Boyd Cohen's CEO of Iomob and is representing our global contingent today, calling in as he is from sunny Spain, I think. So Boyd, you're working across Europe on this active travel micromobility question, this market opportunity. We've obviously heard a bit of what's happening in the UK in terms of the opportunities and some of the hurdles. What do you see as the biggest opportunities or hurdles across that wider European market?
Yeah, I think it's good to put in the context of wider European, and I guess for now we can still include the UK in Europe. I don't know how that is, if that's politically correct still, or what. Maybe it depends on who I'm speaking with. But I think it's interesting to look at it. You already put it in an interesting framework by talking about Europe, because we also have projects, for example, New Zealand, and we did a project in the US. And a lot of people, when you start talking about what does post-COVID look like in cities, I think they have blinders on if they think it's a one-size-fits-all across the world. It's definitely not. In the US and in Asia and other markets, we're starting to see, possibly a reinforcement of the car being a dominant mode, but looking more towards autonomous cars and all the rest, and how we might accelerate that. And it's sort of consistent with the car-dependent culture you find in a lot of those communities. Whereas in Europe, you're seeing a real big movement towards how can we leverage COVID the crisis of COVID to rethink our cities, or it's not even rethink, because if you look at it, most urban planners in Europe have been advocating for a car-free city centers for decades. The problem is there hasn't been enough political will to fight the car lobbies and others to actually make that happen. But there is, as many of you have already said, a window in time, which is right now, where cities can remake themselves. Think about what Paris is doing around the 15-minute city, which is now getting a lot of traction and interest, not just in Europe, but actually globally as a possible model. And underlying 15-minute cities is this idea of how can we get people out of cars into more active travel, micromobility, reshape our cities in ways that make them so walkable and friendly for people, not for cars. So I think really, if you look at it, whether it's in Milan or in Barcelona or in Lisbon or in Paris or in the UK, Berlin, Scandinavia, there's a lot of really interesting initiatives about rethinking our cities right now. Let's not just make this a temporary thing. Some of these cities are already planning to make them permanent, so they're taking this window in time to make them permanent. And then we can go into this, but one thing we think is missing, as Adrian mentioned, is there's this they will come idea of, okay, well, we can just reshape our cities and just assume everything will work, but we're finding it doesn't. And so there's some need for other initiatives, and we're going to be talking about a lot of those today.
Fantastic. Yeah, so there's a really interesting question. You say there's two sides of the coin. There's the urban design question, how we create places which enable, promote and encourage different forms of mobility. And there's the service layer and the infrastructure that sits on top of that, which makes it an easy and accessible and enjoyable way to move about. I think that's really interesting. I think there's I forget the name of the professor, but there's a professor at one of the London universities who talks a lot about what you just said in terms of different parts of the world engineering in different technology horizons. So as you say, if you consolidate around the personal mobility, the car, then you gun for autonomous vehicles, and that's the kind of the trajectory you're on. And other places, public transport is the kind of destination, and so it's smarter, more integrated, more data-driven public transport. And as you say, the third option is more individual, personalized, active travel. And there's lots of great examples across Europe, as you say, where cycling and e-bikes and increasingly other e-mobility options are the dominant form. Someone's shared in the chat a link to the Utrecht planning system, or the cycle lanes, and I was pleased to go to an event last year and hear about other big schemes across Europe to build these enormous bike parks, beautiful, well lit, easy cycle right in and then get off and get on the bus or on the train or whatever. And you say it's there's some big architectural designing opportunities, but the technology layer also needs to work. So do you want to tell us a bit about the technology layer and what you see and what Iomob has been doing to try and unpick some of those hurdles?
Yeah, sure. And actually, real quick on the infrastructure layer, it's something I've been advocating for a while. I'm a self-trained urbanist, so I'm not an urban planner by training, but I've been passionate about cities for a long time. I believe what we're going to see in the near future, and I think COVID may accelerate this, at least in Europe, that you're going to see dedicated pedestrian lanes, dedicated non-motorized micromobility lanes, and dedicated motorized micromobility lanes, because right now we're trying to have shared use of all these more active forms of mobility as we're trying to expand the access to active and micromobility experiences in cities. I think we're going to have to see that. And of course, that will come at the expense of dedicated car lanes, which I think in Europe, there is a very strong movement to embrace that, at least in urban city centers. Now, talking about the digital layer, and Adrian touched on this, we're doing some really interesting work in the UK, for example, with LNER, the rail operator. And we were looking at, with Peterborough and with other communities where the rail, where train services arrive, and how could people properly do a multimodal journey without depending on their car. And as we started looking at it, all the different apps and mapping tools, some of which are are inefficient or inaccurate. For example, many of the core mapping solutions we use don't have updated information about active travel corridors, and they send people on a scooter to take a normal road or a sidewalk when there's actually a dedicated cycling path that's a block away, but the main mapping systems don't always know that. So there's all these complexities. Is there a park and ride available? And so we started playing around with all this and realizing that there's a real need for rethinking multimodal in this active travel world with a digital layer that allows people to factor in private owned vehicles like their own car, their own bike, their own scooter with public facilities like public transit or publicly available park and ride facilities with shared micromobility services in a seamless digital layer so that users can say, what is the best, most affordable, perhaps most sustainable or most healthy way for me to go from A to B? And in some cases, we discovered, even though no app will help you with that, that's what we're building right now, and we will be deploying in the UK, is a way where you can factor in all these different services, public, shared, private, and have a multimodal journey that combines that in a seamless way for people and takes them on the new dedicated active travel corridor. So you really take advantage of it. So this goes back to that point of build it and they will come. We think there's a flaw in that model in the sense that when you have properly digitally connected mobility services across the whole spectrum, you uncover as a user multimodal options that would make total sense to take advantage of that active travel corridor. And you may not have even known it existed or never have been able to figure out how to connect driving your car to a park and ride and taking a Voi or a super pedestrian or free bike on your journey for the last mile. So that to us is where this has to go, is the physical infrastructure needs to transform. We need cities to embrace these micromobility services, and all the players that we have here on this call are those I would consider very responsible with cities. So, you know, we've had some issues with some of the VC-backed micromobility operators not necessarily always behaving the way cities would like them to, but there's a reason the three that are on this call because they want to play very nice with transit authorities, and they see the important role that connecting public transit and micromobility being a first and last mile, and you need digital layers to actually make that seamlessly available to users so that they can get out of their car.
Fantastic. Well, that's an excellent setup, I think, perhaps to bring in our next three participants. So I'm going to invite each of our next speakers to just say a few words introducing themselves and their companies, and then we'll explore a bit more about what they're experiencing and where they're operating in the UK. So first, I'm going to come to Haya. Haya Duridi is the VP for EMEA at Super Pedestrian. So yeah. Over to you.
Good morning, Sam. Good morning, everyone. So quick introduction. I oversee Super Pedestrian in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Super Pedestrian, or to say the brand Link, actually, because our scooter is branded Link, which is what I'm here to talk about today, is a company that was founded in 2012, spun out of MIT Sensible City Lab, really focused on technology and urban innovation. And some of the early products was something called Copenhagen Wheel, which basically can turn any bike into an electric bike. But for the past 7 years, we pioneered what we call vehicle intelligent system. Which basically its purpose was to solve two of the biggest problems that micromobility companies have. The first one being safety. How do you ensure that a shared fleet is actually safe to ride? So of course, like every company, will do some maintenance twice a week, 3 times a week, once a week, depends on the company philosophy. But how do you ensure that if I ride this vehicle and I have an issue, the next rider, is safe to ride? You're not a car company where you're doing all those checks in between. And in order to do that, we developed this kind of autonomous vehicle intelligence system that basically means every scooter will ask itself every second, am I safe to ride? So we monitor like 140 components per second, which is not through sensors. It's actually through really in-depth kind of thermal, mechanical, electric model, which gives us full control of what is happening in the vehicle. This means you'll never have a battery failure. I mean, we've seen some of the earliest issues that a lot of the operators have had where a battery explodes because I don't want to scare anyone from scooters, but it has happened, and that is a big problem, I think, because you cannot put a vehicle in the road that has a brake that is not working. You always need to perform at the same level. So the way that it works is that you have your starting level, and the vehicle will make sure that you're always at that level. It kind of is monitoring the performance and making sure every component is always, the way that it is supposed to be, and not, at a 70%. And it will actually predict the problems before they happen. And then it would tell you, I need some maintenance right now. My battery needs replacement, my brakes need some maintenance, this specific component needs something. And the second that it does that, it takes it off the road. So it's basically, and it issues a ticket for the maintenance team to come and collect the vehicle and run that maintenance. This does two things. First, you make sure you have no broken or half, scooters that are half good to use on the road. And it means that your maintenance cost is actually brought considerably down, which is one of the biggest challenges that the micromobility companies have been facing, is the unit economics. And I know, a lot, are moving in the right direction, which is great, but we still have a really long way to go if we want to bring a real affordable solution to cities. And so I think this is why it's great. The other component that I'd like to talk about is the geofencing, which is really important because it speaks to clutter. And one of the biggest issues in the current the way that geofencing works is that it connects with the cloud. And that means that there's a delay and the GPS is not accurate enough. And probably a lot of you have heard a lot of complaints around how the GPS and geofencing works. It means that enforcement, like sometimes as a rider, you're trying to end a ride and you can't do it because the GPS thinks you're somewhere else. And there's a delay of around 5 to 30 seconds. So we have done geofencing a bit differently, where all the maps are actually stored on the vehicle itself. And what that means is that you can enforce a geofence within like 0.9 seconds. And it activates immediately. It means that even if you don't have cellular service, even if your phone, you don't have the right connection, you can still enforce the geofence. And that allows us better compliance with, rules and regulations around low speed zones or parking zones or whatever it is. It allows us to really kind of be able to control where the vehicle is. So just a quick introduction on the company. We're currently operating in a few markets in the US. We're hoping to, my main task is to expand into Europe and the UK. And we find it really exciting that the UK is actually opening up right now and kind of bringing forward those trials. We're kind of following that and in conversations with a lot of the authorities. Very excited about that.
Fantastic, thank you. There's lots of points I want to come back to, and I'm sure others will want to ask questions about as well. But for now, I'll go on to our next SME rep. So Matthew Morbin, General Manager for the UK from FreeBike. So again, do you want to give us a bit of intro about the company, where you're operating, what your kind of key activities are?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I suspect, unsurprisingly, given our name of FreeBike, we do focus on bikes. Not to say I don't think scooters have a place. I think they're very complementary to our bikes. But we have pedal bikes historically in sort of a docked solution, and then we also have smart bikes and electric bikes, and we have dockless, and hybrid sort of virtual dock solutions. We were formed in sort of 2004 as a company called Homeport in the Czech Republic. We rebranded last year. We have systems right across Europe. Our oldest one is from 2009 in La Rochelle, where we've just expanded it this year to include electric bikes. Previously, it was just docked pedal bikes. And then we have newer systems in places like Slovakia and Finland, which are, completely electric and all dockless, and have had superb usage. And in the case of Finland, they haven't had a single bike stolen or vandalized, which we can't quite say is true for the UK as well. So yeah, we're in around 20 cities in Europe, with a few smaller schemes outside Europe. And we've developed our e-bike for sort of 4 years, and now there's similar bikes on the market, I guess, but when we first released it, it was pretty revolutionary. It's got an integrated locking system. So most e-bikes will have a lock on the back wheel, which could be knocked off or damaged or vandalized, as had an engine lock. And what that allows us to do is enforceable geofencing. So, you know, we can set a perimeter of the operation, and as you approach it, the bike will physically slow down and stop. Obviously safely, no one's flipping over the handlebars or anything like that. But on an operational perspective, it means you're not having to collect bikes from way outside your area, and also the compliance side of it with the city. Alongside that, we sort of have other features like RFID card reader. So you can integrate a transport card or a mass solution, and you can start the rental by just tapping the card. And we are principally a supplier of the hardware and the software to municipalities through tenders, although we do operate our own systems in London and Prague. The great thing about us, I guess, and our sort of unique selling point is the hardware and the software is designed in-house by us. All the bikes are manufactured in the Czech Republic, and the idea of that is it's completely malleable to fit with what the municipalities want. I think, you know, several people have spoken earlier that there isn't a one-size-fits-all system. We know that municipalities want different things. They want to see what their existing transport provision is and how we can integrate into that. So we're not just dropping bikes off, we're building a whole system. And then, yeah, just as I said, in the UK, we won a call to market in the City of London. Started last June with our fleet of electric free bikes, and we've previously supplied for a distributor docked pedal bike systems in Liverpool, Lincoln, Oxford, Reading. Some of those are now closed down, but most are still going.
Fantastic, thank you. Again, lots of things to come back to, and some questions coming in from the audience as well, which is excellent. We'll come back and pick some of us up in a moment. So last but not least, I'd like to introduce Richard Corbett, who's head of UK, Ireland and Benelux for Voi e-scooters. So again, do you want to introduce yourself and the company and where you're operating at the minute?
Yes, thanks, Sam, and thank you for the invite today. Really interesting discussion and really proud to be a part of it. So for those who don't know, Voi is a Swedish e-scooter rental operator. We were the first to launch in Europe in August 2018 in Stockholm. Since then, we're in over 40 cities across Europe, and we have over 20 million rides under our belt, so we really understand what it takes to deliver a really good, safe e-scooter ride. We pride ourselves on being the nice guys in town. We like to work with the cities, in partnership with the cities. We very much take time to entrench ourselves into the local landscape. Involve ourselves with understanding the local transport challenges, which I think some of the maybe larger US operators, not Hire of course, but other operators may be scaling at all costs. So what we do is we tend to work with the city and understand the challenges and problems, create bespoke solutions from parking to ensuring that we're filling those transport gaps. We have actually we're really proud to work with local transport operators. So we have over 20 integrations of our system with other local transport operators, and that really kind of draws upon some of the points that were raised earlier about making this a seamless transport solution across different modes of transport, working with public transport, not against it. Certainly, there is a slight nuance now with post-COVID, where there is a change in objective, where it's about getting people out of public transport, which is something that dockless can do. Because it's inherently dockless, you can change and move the allocation to better suit the city's objectives. But I think longer term, we still want to get back into that mindset of how do we work with the buses, the trams, the trains, etc., where you can travel with the same day pass on the train, the bus, the tram, and the scooter. You don't have to jump between different things, and you can really start to build a credible competitor to the car. The car is inherently the most convenient way to travel. It's parked outside your front door. You open your door and you go, do I walk 20 minutes to the tube station, or do I jump in my car and do the whole journey? And the way that we're going to get sustainable modal shift is by providing a suite of different vehicle options that work together are better, quicker, cheaper than the car. So at Voi, we have e-scooters, which you already know. We also have launched this year e-bikes and e-mopeds. And each one of those serve different journey types. E-scooters less than 5 miles, e-bikes 5 to 10 miles, and e-mopeds plus 10 miles. If we look at just very quickly, what is our kind of advantage, or what was our, every company on this call has a superpower, what they do better than anyone else. I think what we do better than anyone else is integration with cities, sustainability. So we were the first company to do a life cycle analysis with a third party. So Ernst & Young did a full assessment of our products and our services, and we achieved a +2 year lifespan on the vehicle, which again, hot topic. If you're looking at micromobility, some companies are having scooters that they're changing every 1 to 3 months. That's not a green sustainable service. Actually, that could be more damaging for the environment if you don't get that right. So we achieved over 2 year lifespan for the scooters. We became carbon neutral in January of this year. And also we're the first to be zero carbon emission in our operations. So moving all to green energy, green vehicles, changing the swappable batteries on our fleets. So all our fleets are swappable batteries. So sustainability is really at the core of what we do. And then one thing I will say, and just to add before I pass it back to you, Sam, is that working with the city, I heard about infrastructure investments, and working with the city to unlock that space, and working with the operators to convert space that has been allocated to cars, maybe to micromobility. That is where we're going to start to see that development in this area. The three things that are going to help us win and get people onto scooters is availability, price, and functioning product. And of course, price and functioning product is unique to us. We as an operator have to make that happen. But availability, this is where cities can help. And if it is converting a parking space that holds 1 car into a micromobility space that holds 15 e-scooters that can do, each one doing 10 trips a day, that's where we want to be. We'll see a lightening up of the city landscape, more space, cleaner air, but that can't work in isolation. We can't work in isolation. That has to be a collaboration with the cities, and I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic, really exciting. I have to say, I'm constantly inspired when I meet companies, innovators like those we have on the call today, who are working in this connected places market, creating new products and services, making it more enjoyable, more sustainable to live and move about. So it's great. I'm sure lots of you on the line will have been inspired by what you've heard, and some great questions coming in. I'm gonna come back to something. I'm gonna throw it open to all three, and indeed, and Boyd as well. Do chip in. There's a great question here from Richard, which is what I was going to ask myself as well. So I'm going to put it to you providers, which is what's the kind of innovation by city management or place management that you'd most like to see? What would enable you and your companies to reach your full potential in terms of getting more people moving in this more active, more sustainable way? Happy to take any of you in turn as you might feel inspired.
Hi, Sam. I can take this. I think that for me, the most important innovation is really not looking at this only as kind of micromobility, but really linking it to urban planning and really linking it to kind of understanding the needs and the transport needs in the city, which means that you cannot kind of set a very rigid set of rules and not adjust it over time. So I think having that dialogue with a city where you really look at what are the needs and have very open and honest a conversation about it. Like, what are the needs of the different communities? What are the current transport options? I do think that we are, we really complement public transit. And I think ultimately we will only be as successful as we are able to integrate with those public transport and replace car journeys. I think no one on their own is going to be able to replace, car journeys. To Richard's point, the car is very convenient. Unless we are able to kind of work together to create an alternative, very convenient solution, no one is going to, leave their car at home. I think the ultimate goal is for people to not just leave their car at home, but actually sell their car. And so for me, the most innovative in this space is how we are able to connect with each other with each other's, and how do we use technology to solve problems? Because technology can help us understand data, analyze the trips, where are they happening, what are the gaps, how can we work better together, how can we make the options more affordable, what do the commuters need? I do think that we are at only the beginning of the whole micromobility innovation, really the beginning. And all the great usage and adaptation that we see is great, but I think that there's still a huge potential in the commuters, in the daily use, not just the leisure use of like once or twice per week I'm going to use a scooter, but really kind of replacing those commuter trips. And for that, I think it is really about working together and using innovation and technology to help us understand all of those information together and have that open conversation.
Yeah, I think I would agree with all of that. And I just kind of briefly jotted down 4 areas that I think a city can really help to grow the micromobility. A couple of things here is fleet size, availability, parking, and infrastructure. On the fleet size, we need to get critical mass. If you're going to leave your car at home, you need to guarantee that you're going to be able to get to where you want to be and afterwards get back. So you need the availability of scooters. So having a sufficient critical mass is super important. So that means that a sufficient number of vehicles on the road is required. And I think cities will be inherently cautious, when talking to operators, when they, particularly because they've had their fingers burnt by some of the Chinese dockless bike operators from years gone by, who are, leading the market on dockless, but made a lot of mistakes that made everyone super cautious about anyone else that had the word dockless in there. Or free floating in their intro pitch. And I think fleet size and availability is down to utilization. And I think having that clear sense of measuring, well, at what point does the number of vehicles and micromobility vehicles on the road increase? And that should be tied to utilization, which is based on a number of different factors. And so I think we definitely encourage cities to work with the operators to arrive at a growth metric on utilization, where if you go over a certain number of rides, you increase the fleet size. If you reduce, and if an average number of rides reduces below a certain point, you reduce the number of fleet size, so you never have an oversupply. And being dockless, you can flex up and flex down fleet size. In terms of availability and parking, I think that the city, and I think the support from the council to convert that space from car parking space on the road, for example, to micromobility space, as I mentioned before, that is super important. And I think we, in the cities we operate in general, you would launch a city and you would have key points of interest where there's going to be lots of usage of e-scooters or e-bikes. So big transport hubs. So Waterloo Station in London, for example, has the highest number of dockless bike and also Santander bike usage in London. So you would know immediately that if you launched in London, you would need some sort of parking infrastructure there. Otherwise, you're going to have a huge clutter problem. So immediately you start to build that initial infrastructure around known principles, and then following that, after a few months of data, you would then start to know what are the key start and end locations, what are the key routes that people are using, and then start to build infrastructure around that. And that can be anything from parking, but also, bless you, but also on the infrastructure side, on the cycling lanes or micromobility lanes. I think Boyd was putting it quite nicely, where there's going to be walking lanes, non-motorized and motorized lanes. So whatever we call it, I think we need those cycling infrastructure lanes. And where we want to get to is segregated micromobility lanes. I think to get people to ditch the car, they need to feel safe on the road. And they're not going to feel safe on the road as long as there's, thousands of 2-ton vehicles shooting past them within close proximity. So the more we build infrastructure that segregates them from the cars, the quicker the uptake is going to be, because people feel more comfortable that they're going to not get hit by a car. And that's what's important. We need to feel safe. And we can give as many helmets as we want, and we do. We've given tens of thousands of helmets, but you're still sharing roads with these 2-ton metal vehicles. So we need to help build those infrastructures, but also build in areas where we see the most usage. So fleet size, utilization, availability, parking, and infrastructure, I think, are the areas that we need support from the operator. The operators need support, but it's that two-way conversation, right? And I think that is where we're going to really see some huge modal shifts if we can get those areas right.
Fantastic, thanks. Matthew, Boyd, do you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, but I just had a very brief one. I think we've covered off a lot there. I think for me, it's maybe two things. One, perhaps is a bit of a buzzword, but nonetheless, I think the cities need to sort of begin to think a lot more holistically in what they do. If you go and speak to the relevant people at the council, it often be the cycling officer or whatever, and it would be really interesting for them to look at, when the tenders for the bus network is coming up, are we doing everything at the same pace, or are we just trying to add a bike share scheme, put it in and then hope it works? So that one is certainly very important. I think if they can think across departments and build a whole strategy, that would be very beneficial. And then next to that, and I know we are starting to think of it in the future transport zones, but it's thinking of more novel ideas and not being afraid to try them and implement them. And we have to accept that some might not work. And I don't think that's not a problem. That's what these future transport zones are for. But if we just want to put in another ordinary bike share and expect it to get a load of usage, it's probably not. We need to think, are you going to be able to use, as we spoke about earlier, the same ticketing system to use a bus and the bike, depending on the weather? We need to give people that choice, and we need to try these things. So that was just a quick point. And of course, all the ones previously, absolutely agree.
Yeah, real quick, I'll add something, and I'd also like to hear from Suhal on this question. Since we're talking about what cities should do, let's find out what cities think they should do, or what they think we're saying they should do is accurate or not. But one comment I'd make, because everybody's covered most of the things I would have said about this topic, is I think we're going to see innovation around not just the potential for seamless bundling of tickets across these modes, but I think we're going to see a reorientation of what cities do around micromobility. I personally think, and maybe not everyone on here is in agreement, for example, Free Bike does tenders for these public bike share schemes, but I think that's sort of like 20th century approach to this. I think that made sense when there weren't so many available micromobility operators who are working really hard to innovate with technology and pricing models so that it becomes more and more affordable as a first and last mile solution. So I think we're going to see a shift from single mode deployments of publicly owned or tendered micromobility services like Santander Bike scheme, and shift towards supporting and subsidizing an open micromobility marketplace where you can have multiple private mobility services where, under certain conditions, particularly when they're paired with public transit, for example, they are subsidized in ways, because we're talking a lot about the desire to get people out of cars and how micromobility can play a really big role. But we all know on this call that one of the big challenges to making that happen, besides the certainty of availability of a micromobility vehicle when you arrive at your transit destination, is, wow, a round trip cost on a scooter is not cheap. On a bike, sometimes it's more affordable, but for a lot of people, it's not very affordable. And so I think that affordability issue and rethinking the role of the public sector in facilitating the adoption and growth of micromobility as a first mile, last mile solution means they should rethink how they spend that money, instead of on a single mode like a bike share system that they're going to own and operate, adopt one, to shifting those resources towards innovation that the private sector can add to the ecosystem.
Excellent. Well, yeah, so I was going to come to Sahel and asking this question as well. I think it's a really interesting question. As you say, what do you see as being what's been the secret to success, I suppose, in Peterborough in winning friends and influencing the politicians, the public, for the kind of changes that you've been making?
I think Peterborough is quite unique in the sense that if you're familiar with Peterborough, you know that it was built around the car. It was built for the car. Jumping in your car and traveling to work is the easiest and quickest way to travel, largely because of the way the city was designed. We have a pathway system. You can avoid going into the city centre to get around from one side of the city to the other. So we don't really have problems around congestion and things like that. I think a lot of what has been said has really hit the nail on the head. We need a combined approach to this. So we need ease for the user. So something similar to what Iomob is working on would be fantastic. A single easy solution where somebody can pay for their bus travel, their multimodal journey using micromobility, using public transport, etc., to get from A to B. Just making that easier will encourage more people to take that journey via more sustainable means. Also, as mentioned, safety is key. We do need more segregated cycling, something which we are working towards. Obviously, as I'm sure you're aware, local authorities have significant challenges around budgets and savings, and we're not unique in that sense. We also have our own challenges, and a lot of the time this infrastructure is significantly expensive. But as I said, it's something that we're working towards, and a lot of the time it is just that education and engagement with businesses, with employees, just to get that message across. So, I think, something which we haven't necessarily touched upon in this meeting is accessibility. How do we make, walking, maybe not necessarily cycling forward, but walking more accessible for those, for example, with, disabilities, with, people who are visually impaired. So one of the things we're working on in Peterborough is a project with the RNIB. We're coming to the sort of conclusion of the project, and it's essentially a wayfinding solution which provides an audio wayfinding solution for blind and partially sighted users to navigate around Peterborough city centre. This uses Bluetooth technology to provide messaging. I know you can get something similar with Google Maps, but the accuracy is the key here. And a few meters difference for a blind person could be the difference between being on a path and being in the middle of the road. So, I think you're right, we need to look at this holistically, but we also need to ensure that we are inclusive in what we are doing and make sure we don't neglect those, people with various disabilities and, maybe blindness as well.
That's a really good point. Thanks, Sahel. There was a question from the audience, actually from Alice, about access and inclusion. And I don't know whether anyone wants to pick up this question around any analysis or understanding you have of the different user bases. Whether there's trends in different genders or ethnicities. We're obviously at a time of thinking very carefully and quite rightly about access and privilege. And as Boyd said, there's a risk that some of these technologies are too expensive for people from certain backgrounds. What, if anything, are you guys doing to understand and try and make sure that we are making these really open? Richard, do you want to go first?
Thanks, Sam. And thank you, Alice, for the question. So one of the things we've noticed in our user data is that you see more men using micromobility than women, and certainly a lower percentage from minority groups. And so one of the things we have done to change that is to change the two things. One is the pricing model, but also the drop engine, which dictates where the scooters actually go, where we distribute it. We found that, for example, in certain cities where where we see some certain minority groups, there is a low, for example, percentage of people holding bank accounts and credit cards, and so we went to a cash-only system where they were able to load effectively a gift card with cash, And then we were able to grow that particular group of minority group from low income group who didn't have an ability to use micromobility. So they were able to now use the service when they couldn't before. So I think innovation on that side was important, on the payment side. And also we created something called Void for All. So those who were from low income groups on benefits, child benefits, work benefits, earning less than equivalent to 15,000 a year, were able to buy a monthly travel pass with Void for £10. So that's something we do now in the UK. So anyone in the UK who complies can have a all-you-can travel pass for £10 a month. And so I think it's important for the operators to really think about their pricing models to make it more inclusive. And what we're really proud about at Void is that we're democratizing mobility. This isn't about guys with long hair and skinny jeans riding through Shoreditch on e-scooters. That's not who we're targeting. This is about creating a credible new form of transport that is going to change how everyone travels, not just those entitled. And I think that is certainly going to, I think, yes, where we are right now is not where we want to be. We need to make this more inclusive. We need to democratize it. We need to innovate on the pricing model. We need to think about what are the challenges to get some of these groups on board, engage with those groups, and I think get them involved in the process as well. And from a slightly different angle, but from a disability angle, every city we launch with, we create effectively a steering group in that city. That steering group is made up of key groups that make up and represent that landscape, from the low-income groups to minorities, to business workers, to the visually impaired. And it's important to get their inputs on what we're doing well and what we're not doing well. Because you cannot apply a cookie cutter approach to every city. Every city has a different demographic makeup, a different transport challenge, different public transport support system, different infrastructure. And so all those things will change what you do. Some cities have got no pavement space, particularly in some of the old medieval towns in the UK, like Oxford and Cambridge. You might see very, very narrow pavements versus, let's say, some of the other cities we operate in Europe, where they have wide pavements, like in Paris, where you can put parking on the pavement. We cannot do that in smaller towns, in older medieval towns. We have to take that off the pavements. We have to listen to the visually impaired groups. We have to get them onto the road, for example, in car parking spaces. And so I know I've gone full circle into my first response to the first question, but I think that if we're going to engage with the different groups and get those numbers and percentages of different groups, different genders, different backgrounds using this, we have to innovate on pricing. We also have to innovate on where we deliver the scooters. People from lower income groups are going to be in the harder to reach locations. The reason why people have, you have a cheap house in London, a 4-bedroom house, because you have to walk an hour to get to the nearest tube station. And that is where the low income people live. And so they're the ones who need the greatest mobility support. And so getting the scooters to where they need to be will help grow that group using micromobility and other forms of transport.
Fantastic, thanks. Yeah, there's a great example in I think it's the Happy City book by Charles Montgomery about, oh gosh, I forget which country it is, but where they built, where they're re-engineering the road systems, and as has been alluded to here, high quality bus rapid transit networks were built from the more deprived areas into the heart of the city, and as I said, there was space for the public vehicle, the public transport, the private active travel, and actually there was just a single lane for cars, and there was definitely a sort of a psychological privileging of giving people access and opportunity to come into the city and access those. Do anyone else want to come in on this question around, really it's about barriers to adoption, isn't it? What is it that stops people from taking these services up, and how are you overcoming those? Haya or Matthew, you want to come on those?
Sure, Sam. So I agree with everything that Richard said. What I would like to add is like, I think that the real potential is actually where bus or rail routes don't quite service the exact route desired, or they actually don't even get there. And that potential we haven't even explored yet. So everything that we've seen and this massive adaptation that we have seen of e-scooters, I think this has been focused on like very limited operating area to begin with, and on a very limited group of people to begin with. So that's why I say we're still in the beginning of that revolution. So I think of like, you know, really massive adaptation will happen when everyone has accessibility, whether it means that you can actually take a trip from any point A to point B. And for that to happen, you need infrastructure to allow for that to happen. So we need more cycling lanes. For that to happen, you need pricing to be right, and you need to have maybe different pricing for different groups. Different pricing for those with low income, where, you know, both operators in the city can work, you know, together to kind of share that burden and have an open conversation on how can we make this model work. So I think that there are like different components to making that happen. There is also a component of like some of the women that I always see that they're a little bit more shy to try out the scooters. So that's why we, you know, we're planning to do a lot of kind of engagements with some of those elderly groups or women groups to do some safety training, because once you try it once, you usually fall in love. But the question is, you need to get on it the first time, and then I think, you know, it would be a love story afterwards. I do see a lot that a lot of the people that don't are scared of scooters or don't like scooters have never tried them. So I think it's the question of getting them to try that one time and then taking it from there. And I do think that everything that, you know, we're doing around safety and ensuring that the vehicle is safe to ride, that kind of bridges that. So I feel like there's still like a big role that we all need to work together. And the objective is actually to build that consumer confidence that this is a real alternative to car, like together combined with public transports and other offerings, that we're one of several solutions, but all those solutions together are providing a real alternative to car. Because unless I have the confidence for that, I'm not going to just sell my car to have, you know, journeys only in the city center. So I think we're still really in the beginning. And for that to happen, you really need to have a real collaboration and an honest conversation between the private operators and the public sector, because unit economics need to work, pricing need to work, affordability need to work. So there's still a lot, I think. And I think we took some really nice, good first steps. But I think the next few years, you can really see that kind of revolution of massive adaptation. And the way I see it is that you need to think of cities looking completely different from how they look today. And this is where it's difficult, because whenever we have those conversations, we feel very constrained with the current urban setting, with the current urban planning, where cars have the biggest share of the road. So if we try to kind of forget that for a minute, and I think that's what COVID helped us do, to kind of reimagine the cities, because there was no one in the road. It was all like pretty and clean and nice. And then we were like, oh yeah, a lot of cities have kind of pioneered. You see Milan, Paris, cities really across actually Europe, the UK, saying we want to bring more micromobility, we want to bring more e-scooters, we want to have those segregated biking lanes. And you could see that when the political will is there, things can move quite quickly, which is really great.
Yeah, well, I just add something there, Sam. I think first we need to acknowledge actually that in a lot of cases, micromobility is expensive. You know, we look at the bikes in London, we're looking at between sort of 10 and 15 pence for 10 minutes, maybe with an unlock fee as well. Certainly in London, where you have obviously subsidized buses, they can't really compete with that sort of price. So what we do, our free bike, for instance, for the schemes that we operate, the bikes can be used in electric assist or pedal mode. So in pedal mode, we offer them for free for 10 or 20 minutes, which excludes for the purpose of inclusivity, of course, and also because we know that once people use them, they will stay using them. So that's just how it works. But I think to Boyd's point about sort of tendering, and certainly in sort of tier 2 cities, this is where tendering is still quite important, where if the assets are publicly owned, they can set the pricing, they can subsidize the pricing much easier, and they can select the user groups that they want to focus on. So I think there's room for both. There's room for the micromobility market, and there's also room for maybe tendering 2.0, where it's not just a bike share, it is still a micromobility package, but it's still a public asset.
think that's a really interesting point, as you say, around the choices place leaders can make in how they engineer a public mobility solution. And I think, you know, the work that Sahel's talked about in Peterborough, and you say different ways of designing these business models to enable different levels of access or different adoption is really interesting. So that's really an interesting set of conversations. I'm keen to come on to the question of well, it's partly about safety and it's partly about technology. You know, each of you have talked about some really impressive innovation in the way that these systems and the services are designed to give people confidence and to give asset owners or the authority confidence. There's been a few questions about this. So Haya, I think there's one you'd like to answer initially about injuries, people falling off scooters. But I think more broadly, I'd like to come back to what you were saying about the way you're integrating technology to give people, well, I say both to give actual safety, to know the asset is safe, but also to be able to give a sense of confidence to people. And then I think there's also some question about geofencing. I think there's one Richard was keen to answer about the fidelity of geofencing on different parts of the road space. So, Haya, do you want to answer that first question?
Yeah, sure. So I think there are like three components to safety. Like, how do you make sure that it's safe to ride an e-scooter? So I think the first component, which is what we spent the last 6 years working on, and we've not deployed in hundreds of cities because we've been really working on engineering. We design our own vehicle. It lasts for I think 3 to 4 years because 2,500 rides, depending on the city, that can be like quite long. And the reason is that you really need to make sure that the vehicle is safe to ride every time. So we cannot afford to have vehicles where you have brake failures. We cannot afford to have vehicles where you have, even if it's one in I don't know, 10,000 that you have a battery going on fire, it brings those type of questions, right? And it brings, you see it all over the media, and it's just not safe. It's just not okay that someone is riding a vehicle that's not safe to ride. So I think the vehicle safety is a big component of it, and that's the one we've invested, you know, most in. And I think the vehicle intelligence system is really setting kind of the standards for the industry, and is something that I'm hoping that we see a lot of the operators kind of go in that direction. Because that's really, you know, I think that is what, you know, for shared scooters, it's very different from private ones. And this is where actually the core of it is making sure it's safe. Having said so, there are other elements to safety. So one is infrastructure. So you are much more safer when you are on a segregated bike lane. You're not supposed to be with a traffic of 50 kilometers per hour. This just does not work. And that's why you see a lot of cities either creating those segregated bike lanes or looking at like having reduced speed zones, saying actually within the city it should be 30 kilometers, not more, and that allows different kind of vehicles to coexist. And I think the third element of that is just an element of education and getting adjusted, because this is completely new. I think the first few months it was just like, oh, where do we ride? Do we ride on the pavement? Do we ride on the street? What's our place on the road? And I think that was a little bit unclear in the beginning. And this is where I think geofencing can play a really important role to kind of say, yeah, you can't ride here. This is a no ride zone. We've actually innovated what we call like sidewalk detection technology, which is in some areas, we could implement that in the city, that we could, you know, if a rider is riding on sidewalk, we can actually send them a notification after the trip and say, you know, this is not where you're supposed to walk. But that doesn't completely solve the problem without the infrastructure bit. Because the riders only ride, to be very sincere, like riders only ride on the sidewalk when there is no bike lane. Otherwise, there is no reason for them to be on a bit of weird cobblestone pavement. Like it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think the infrastructure component is really like the key, combined with a vehicle that is safe and where we can use like the technology to really control every component, every element of that vehicle. And I think the standards need to be really kind of, we need to set the bar high. We can't say that, you know, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 2,000, 1 in 10,000 vehicle is okay, like if it has a failure. I think the goal should be 0. And we should really say we want to have 0 accidents on the road. And we working together with a lot of the operators, I think, and the city to also do campaigns to educate both users and the public, because I think it's not only about users of scooters, it's also about the cars. Like to kind of wrap this up, I also think it's important to realize that car is what causes most accidents. And I do think that we just need to kind of educate users of cars that there are other components in the road that's not them. I mean, if we take the Netherlands as an example, it's a country where bikes always have priority over everyone, well, over cars at least, sometimes even over pedestrians. But so that's like the car drivers are much more conscious that they're not the only vehicle in the road. I think it is a question of coexistence. You're not the only one on the road. If you have a car, it doesn't mean you can just go around and not look, and respecting traffic rules and, you know, kind of understanding that you're not the only one. I think this is, you know, and safety is in numbers. So the more scooters we have, the more bikes we have. That's why, you know, in places like the Nordics or in the Netherlands, it's quite, you know, it's quite okay in terms of like safety if you're on a bike.
Fantastic. Thank you. Richard, Matt, Boyd, do you want to comment on that, Richard?
Yeah, I agree with, you know, everything Haya is saying. I think definitely getting the products right and making sure the vehicle is safe is something that is our duty as a basic requirement. I think I also agree with the points around it being, you know, we're not, you know, it's not just the rider, it's other road users and other, you know, stakeholders in the mix that need to be involved and educated and brought along for the, you know, on the subject of safety. At Voi, we actually created last year the first e-scooter training school that has been accredited, and so that is something that we're now working with Road Smart and AA in the UK to get that accredited in the UK. That would mean that you know, if you pass the test, you get discounted rides. I think we have to use as many incentives as possible to get people to, you know, that's our obligation. We should incentivize that wherever possible as an operator. We spent about we spent 1.5 million pounds so far on getting people onto the training school, and we've had 400,000 people pass that test. So I think we need to continue doing that, whether it's online or offline. Education is key. There's other areas around compliance and safety, making sure that, you know, the people riding are over the right age. They do have a driving license, even provisional for e-scooters, which is something we haven't gone into the compliance side yet. But we actually screen every rider to make sure that they pass that. On the insurance side, I think we're one of the only operators who do fully comprehensive insurance cover. So it's, I think the Department for Transport requested it as a third-party liability cover as a basic requirement, and that kind of aligns with e-bikes. But I think that, and also other bike rental schemes. But I think that we should raise the bar here. This is a new vehicle. This is going to be the biggest transport revolution of the last 100 years. And I think we need to hold people's hands through this process. And I think we should raise the bar on things like safety. So for insurance, we do fully comprehensive cover. So all riders are covered with personal accident and third party. I think you have to spend money on awareness campaigns. You need to tell people to wear helmets. I need to give them free helmets. And we also have something we've developed, which is called a selfie, a helmet selfie, where if you take the picture and you've got a helmet, you get a discount because we know you're riding with a helmet. And we also have a drunk prevention app where you have to complete a puzzle after a certain point in the day, in the evening, where you have to complete it to confirm that you're not drunk. There are a number of different measures that technology can start to help to reduce to improve safety beyond the vehicle. And I think it's our duty as the operator to keep innovating. I think you talked about it, Sam. There's such a fast pace of innovation now, and I think what's beautiful about it is that councils, you know, in years gone by would have to figure this all out themselves. Now there's this huge kind of movement in the tech startup scene where they're saying, we'll do all of this. We're a full turnkey solution. You pay for nothing. Just give us access to the city, set the requirements, and we'll do the rest, but we will fund it commercially. And that's where you start to see innovation on pricing. Haya talks about unit economics being super important. I think to that point, if you have too many operators operating in a city, then you're never going to be profitable, particularly on the small to medium-sized cities. Definitely the bigger cities like London, West Midlands regions, you can look at 2 operators there. But I think in smaller cities, you need to really focus on one. You need a financially strong operator, because you don't want them to go, you know, boom and bust in your city. You want them to be there for many years to come. So I think helping them be strong, helping them with single operator licenses, I think really helps them to really entrench into the city, deliver the service that they're supposed to, and get unique economics right so they can be here for years to come. So I think that's super important as well.
Fantastic. Amazing, really good. Okay, so sorry, I was doing some back office stuff with our events colleagues, and I haven't geared up the next question. Are there questions on here that you guys have looked at that you'd like to answer I haven't yet posed? There's lots here we could pick from. Boom, boom, boom.
I'll jump in on one that was a simple question, but it's a fun one for me to answer from Richard Miller. Are integrated transport as a service apps like WIM the future? And actually, Adrian, who's with Iomob, who helped start this call, actually was the former head of biz dev for WIM, Moss Global, and now he's executive at Iomob, helping us lead the UK operations. What Iomob does is we offer a WIM-like experience, or if you will, in the UK, kind of city mapper-esque, in the sense of offering users seamless access to all the different mobility services. But in our case, we do it different than WIM in the sense that WIM was B2C or is B2C. So they offer this as a branded service direct to end users. And they have a strong focus on subscription models, which is about getting people to move away from owning cars to owning a monthly license or service to access a range of services. So that's the WIM model. Iomob has a different approach. We actually enable transit authorities and rail operators and other organizations to offer that kind of seamless end-to-end mobility journey in their own app. So I mentioned earlier, we're working with LNER, London Northeast Railway. We have a project with Skåne Trafiken in Sweden. We've done a project in Wellington, New Zealand, with Renfe, the Spanish rail operator in Spain. So we believe this seamless door-to-door experience is absolutely the future of mobility. It has to be, for all the reasons we've discussed today, that the fragmented experience does not support modal shift away from cars. People have to have a clear understanding of what the alternative ways to go from A to B are, and preferably be able to seamlessly access those. So when you talk about micromobility, what do we do? And in fact, our first phase with LNER is about, in fact, every operator on here will likely be part of our experience with LNER, which is in phase one, offer rail users seamless access to a range of micromobility services in the different stops where they arrive, whether it's Peterborough or any of the other King's Cross or any of the other destinations they go to, so that people have more certainty and confidence that they will be able to not take their car and actually get to their destination. And I think I'm actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to share one slide with you just because I think it helps visualize where we see the world going in MOS and mobility as a service and how this could play out in terms of true integration of all these different services. So in fact, a lot of our insights from this have come from our early work in the UK, that as we're trying to embrace this active mobility and encourage more active travel corridor usage, we came to realize by talking to users and other players in the ecosystem that if you really want people to think differently, and there was another question in here about how are you going to ensure people don't, why would people not go in their car when they have too much uncertainty around all these other things that are available? And generally a car is superior. And I would argue that it isn't always superior for a lot of reasons. And there was a mention around carrot and stick being an important part, and we fully agree with that. And I'll actually reflect on that real quickly as I share this example. So this is somebody going from Kenilworth to Coventry. It's not a far journey. All of these filters would be services that are currently available in this mobility integrated experience that are public or private or shared vehicles. And then my own private vehicles can be contemplated by the routing algorithm. And so I can say, okay, I'm going on this journey and I don't really know my best way to go. Maybe I could, I don't know, maybe taking my own car makes sense, or my own bike. I'm not sure. I need to see what my options are. And we're working on something where you could even have a social distancing filter to even further refine the options that the user sees. In this case, the user sees, for example, 4 options. I can take my own bike, the whole journey, it'd take me 29 minutes, it'd be free, and I can park for free, public infrastructure. I can take my car the whole way, park near my destination and pay £6 for a few hours. I can take my car most of the way, use publicly available free parking for park and ride outside of the core of the city, and then take a scooter the rest of the way, and that'll cost me £2.50, £2 50 pence, or I can take public transit the whole way. In this case, the user chooses this one, which I find really interesting because you have a combination of privately owned vehicle, public infrastructure, which is a public park and ride, and a shared micromobility service in a seamlessly integrated journey. And while that might sound unusual, it's not. In fact, on a regular basis, I take my private bike to the suburban rail station in my town outside of Barcelona. I take the suburban rail into Plaza Catalunya, which is the main destination. And right now I look for whatever, there's only 2 micromobility services. Well, there's more than that now, but there's a few micromobility services available in Plaza Catalunya frequently. And I sometimes take those to my office. So that kind of journey is possible, but when you make it seamlessly available in a digital way, it becomes more transparent for the user. And you can even embed what we call in mobility as a service level 4 discussion around societal benefits, around carbon emissions from the different journeys. You can do a cost of ownership of the car. So I took this journey, and while it's free to park, it's not free to operate. So we can even come up with some estimates on what your actual cost of ownership of that vehicle to take it to the park and ride is. And then you can seamlessly book, unlock, and pay for that micromobility service when you get to your destination. And one last point on this particular example that Adrian and I worked on, it took us a long time to figure out the alternatives using all the different apps that are available, mapping apps, and how much it costs to park and where park and rides are. So while this looks seamless and obvious, it's not to any user right now because no service makes this seamless and obvious for them. But one last point on that comment is that the traditional mapping tool that starts with G and ends in E that comes from the US, when you choose an option, say, okay, from here I want to take micromobility, my own bike or a scooter service, it actually takes the user on this corridor right here. Well, that's a street with lots of cars and no designated cycling. But guess what? In this town, in Coventry, there is a designated cycling path that's adjacent to this road that would be safe. But how do I know that? So that goes back to the point we started with. You build the app. We all agree on this call. The most important thing probably in all of this, we want to avoid Carmageddon, is cities embracing and supporting the transformation of urban fabric to focus away from cars and towards active and micromobility. You have to have that before you can do anything else. Then you embrace the micromobility operators as a really important part of the first and last mile journey. And then you seamlessly connect them with a mobility as a service type experience where you ensure that the actual active travel corridors are reflected in this so that people can safely travel to their end destination and do it all seamlessly.
Fantastic. I mean, that is the future, isn't it? That's got to be the way this becomes the mainstream, becomes the norm. We all need to have that depth of data-enabled local knowledge. So whether it's local to us or not, as you say, we can find the right way to use this infrastructure. I'm aware we're coming up to close. I'm keen to come back to Sahel and ask his view on, where else in the UK do you see as leading from the place and the planning side of things? Who do you look to for inspiration? Who are you working with to try and build these more integrated, more sustainable, active structures and networks?
I think the closest place is obviously Cambridge, which is completely different demographics to that of Peterborough. It's very much, a cycling city, as is Oxford. But you've also got places like Bristol who are doing some really, really good work, and Nottingham, Leicester, a little bit closer to home. So they're the kind of guys that we're leading to. I think somebody sort of alluded to it on one of the questions that it really comes down to getting political buy-in and support from council leaders and councillors to support these initiatives to really create that change. Because without that, it's very difficult to get anything done, really. So I think we're quite close to Cambridge in terms of how we work, but in terms of the demographics of the city and the challenges we face and they face, it's completely different. as is the political support.
Very good. Any of the other panelists want to call out and celebrate any particularly pioneering and inspiring place leaders that you've been working with or that you've come across? I think it's really good to encourage and celebrate those who are trying to take a lead in this. You want to give any accolades?
Just one thing from our side, we've just announced recently that we have a partnership with University of Cambridge, University of Leeds and University of Glasgow, and 3 universities working with VOI will be conducting in-depth research on all our operations across the UK, and that data will be will go into a series of different updates where we're focusing on understanding what is the impact on modal shift. Are we taking people from cars? Are we taking people from walking? What are we doing? Well, that's super helpful for us because with those updates, we'll be able to adapt our strategy to ensure that we are definitely pulling people out of cars and not pulling people out of from walking or cycling. So that's really helpful. But also looking at a number of different things around impacts to vulnerable groups, impact to air quality. Are we actually decarbonising the air? So really some really good impartial third-party data, because we all talk about it, but let's see it really happening. And so really pleased to get these 3 prestigious institutions working on that. And also something that's really close to my heart is around mental health. I think we overlook this quite a bit, but we travel a heck of a lot, hours and hours on it. I don't know what the exact average is. I'm sure someone on the call has the average, but we spend hours every day multiplied over the year sitting in traffic, and it isn't good for your mental health. Hai made the point earlier that when you ride, you'll love it. You're out in the air. There is that connection. There is that exhilaration. There's a mental health benefit that again is something that the universities will be looking into, because if you smile on your commute to work, that's not a bad thing. So there are things that it's very hard to quantify, but we think there's something there, and also the benefits of micromobility on small businesses. What we've noticed in some of the cities we've operated in is that when you're committed to a journey in a car, you don't stop along the way. So a lot of the smaller businesses who are in the sub-prime locations do not benefit from passing traffic because people are committed on that route. With micromobility, you are connected, you're out. You can easily stop, brake and have a look, put the kickstand on and go into that local theatre you've never looked at, or go into that bookshop you always passed on the way. And what we've noticed is there's huge spikes in this transfer of economic wealth, better distribution in cities that we have never seen before because of our over-reliance on cars. And so that is another area of the study that we're going to look into. So engaging with all the key stakeholders to get their input on that. So I'm just really excited to see the data, because don't forget, with these scooters, this is a trial. We're learning, the government's learning, the cities are learning, is this right for UK and how can we make it right? So there's a lot of learning. So data is going to be key to answering that question.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, lots there. I look forward to reading and hearing about those outputs. And if you share them with us, we'll try and share them with the world as well. Yes, you mentioned the point about the stress of commute. One of the favourite statistics I used to use was from an HP neuroscience study where they looked at commuters, and they found that the stress level of people commuting in the UK by train and car was equivalent to fighter pilots engaged in dogfighting exercises or riot police in front of protesters. So as you say, the amount of time you spend building up those poisonous brain chemicals in the stress of a commute, and it takes an hour or more for that to flow out of your system, and so that time you arrive at work, your first hour is highly unproductive. And indeed, your first hour at home as well, it's very bad for relationships and community engagement. So I think it's really exciting to see, the way we travel, not just about, reducing congestion and improving the environment, but actually having a wide variety of human, social, and collective benefits and opportunities. So that's really inspiring. We're coming up, I think, to the last moment. So I'm going to draw a line there. I'm going to ask you all in your respective homes or offices or wherever you are today to to clap conspicuously, though we can't see you, for our panelists. Thank you for joining and asking your questions. We had too many questions to get through, lots of great ones. What I've been doing with these webinars has been to work with the panelists to do a bit of a write-up, a blog, a summary afterwards. So anything we didn't get to, we'll try and package up and publish something in the next week or two. And we'll include links to some of the things people have referenced to make sure that we're helping carry on the conversation. Do get involved with each of these companies if you're if you're looking for providers, and do get in touch. Then their information will be available. Do get in touch with us at the Catapult. We've done work with Department of Transport on the regulatory hurdles and issues around micromobility and e-scooters, and we're continuing to do work on how we help buyers and providers connect and make smart decisions in this mobility space. So do follow on with what we're doing. There are other events coming up over the next couple of weeks. Here we are. So do be sure, if you've enjoyed this, to sign up for some of these other opportunities. Yeah, I think that's there. This session's been recorded, so if you want to go back and follow or share the link, we will share it on our social feed. So by all means, dip back in and help other people discover. But yeah, so once again, thank you to all of you for attending. Huge thanks to our panelists for sharing their time and their expertise. It's been a really, really interesting discussion. Do come back and connect with us again as we try to harness UK innovation to create connected places for a greener and more productive future. Thanks all.
Thanks, Sam.
Goodbye.
Thanks, guys.